Welcome to the Run for God Run Club, where you will find God in a runner's space.
Welcome to the Run for God Run Club. This is your one stop each week to be motivated and inspired to get off the couch and onto the running trail where you can, in turn, inspire others to do the same. Let's learn, laugh, and leap into running together, giving God the glory for what we are able to do in His name. Amen. I am your running host, Dean Thompson. We talk a lot about what it means to run for God on this podcast, and when we do, it's great. But what about the rest of our lives? Are we glorifying Him in those things too? Well, we're going to talk about it. Also, I'm going to share my thoughts on an NBA legend and how he can instruct us in our fitness journey and our spiritual journey. And of course, joining me once again for all of that is Run for God founder Mitchell Hollis.
Thanks for having me, Dean. How was your week?
It's been a good week. Yeah. We're getting ready for a cross-country meet, at home. So
it's going to be parking's going to be fun.
It is. We're gonna park them a little wider, I think.
How many teams have we got?
There's 35, I think, the last I checked.
And I don't think we've ever had that many teams there.
I think we've been close, though.
Okay.
I know we've been over 30.
But I mean, parking, when we have that many teams, parking is just havoc.
Yes.
I mean, all around that area. Because it's really not, that parking area is not made for that many people. But we'll make it work.
We will make it work.
We might have some upset neighbors, but
well, hopefully not. Yeah.
Hey, so I wanted to tell you about something that happened to me last night. Did you see my Facebook last night?
I didn't.
So you don't know anything about what I'm talking about?
No.
So I am sitting on our back porch, and it was me and Lane and Landon and Christian, Lane's girlfriend. And we look up in the sky. I forget who saw it first. It might have been Landon. He said, "What is that?" I look up in the sky, and Dean, I thought we were either being invaded or aliens were coming down to Earth. What we saw was kind of not from the edge of the sky, so not from the horizon, but just out of the middle, almost like it was a wormhole.
Yeah.
We started seeing these lights just come into the view of the sky, one after another in a perfectly straight line, and it went all the way across the sky, like 60 of them, and then it went away.
I've seen it.
And so, I mean, I'm flipping out, Dean. I'm like, I have never seen anything in my life. It's not planes, because it's obvious that it's out of our atmosphere. It's just obvious it is by the scale of it. They were moving at a speed that no plane could ever move at that high. I mean, it was going tens of thousands of miles an hour. And so, I mean, we're just in awe. I'm screaming at Holly. She's getting out of the shower. I'm like, you got to get out here. You got to see this. And I picked up my phone and I just snapped a picture of it. And I put it on my Facebook page. I said, "So who just saw this? I'm really disturbed by what I saw, and I'm being serious when I say that. I have no idea what this is." Well, almost immediately, people started telling me about it's Elon Musk's satellites.
Yeah.
And that go across the sky, and they're low enough where we can see them with the human eye, but they're high enough to where what you're actually seeing is the sun hitting them. Because they're so high up in the atmosphere, you're seeing the sun's reflection off of them, but it's pitch black dark.
Yeah, I didn't realize that's why they were where
we're at. And I mean, I was like, we're being invaded. Or this is alien. I mean, it can only be one of those two things, and it was crazy. So you've seen it?
I've seen it. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, and it is. I mean, if you don't know what it is, it could be a little disturbing looking for sure.
It was very disturbing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not one of these conspiracy people, but I was like, okay,
I believe in UFOs.
Aliens are real. They're real for sure. I just saw them. But so yeah, had a lot of kicks and giggles. People.
That's.
I mean, it's like everybody knew.
Everybody knew. Yeah, I was going to say
my family.
Yeah, I don't know how you missed that, but yeah. Well, let me throw out a challenge here. Okay, so this podcast, we have had over 80,000 downloads in this podcast, right? Mm-hmm. And we would like to hit 100,000 downloads by the end of this year. But on our current pace, we're not going to quite get there.
You mean 200,000? Oh, 100,000. I'm sorry.
100,000.
100,000 by the end of the year.
By the end of the year.
I think we could pull that off.
We need, if you're listening to this, we need you to share this. We need you to get some other folks on board, and we need you to get them to download it so we can hit 100,000 downloads by the end of this year.
100,000 by the end of the year.
Yep.
You heard it, people out there listening.
That's the challenge.
Dean threw out a challenge. Yep. Dean's challenge. I think we can do it.
I think we can too. Yeah.
So let's talk about this week's sponsor, our good buddy Brandon Combs over at State Farm. Sounding like my mom, putting an S on everything. State Farm with Brandon Combs. When you make the right decision, it feels good, like picking the perfect accent rug or choosing a good night's sleep over an all-night crime binge show. It feels really good to make the right insurance decision, too. That's why State Farm agent Brandon Combs is right here in Dalton, Georgia to help you select the right protection at the right price. Brandon will make you understand your State Farm coverage so you'll know what to expect when the unexpected happens with State Farm agent Brandon Combs. It's easy to make the right choice. Just call him. When you want the real deal, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. So again, to all of our sponsors out there, including Brandon and his whole team down there, thank you for supporting what we do here, because we simply can't do it without you.
Absolutely. Well, a Facebook post from last week comes from Heather Valdez, and if you've been in Run Club for any length of time, you probably know who Heather is, and she's back at it. So she posted this. At physical therapy today, I got to run. It was only 2 minutes and 30 seconds of running. The rest was hard walking, but it's the first time I have run in over 6 months, and the first high-impact activity since surgery 3 months ago. Physical therapy is slowly getting me back into form. Praise Jesus for knowledgeable, caring PTs, and thank you, God, for your faithfulness to us in our weaknesses.
So, Heather is obviously from Casper, Wyoming.
Yeah.
I still want to visit there sometime.
Yeah, me too.
Have you ever been to Wyoming?
I have. Yeah, Debbie and I drove through Wyoming. That one year where we drove 3,500 miles in 9 days, we went through Wyoming. So,
well, I'm glad to hear. Yeah, I knew Heather was struggling with some injuries, and it's been a while since she runs. So I'm glad to hear she's back at it. It's great to hear these stories. It's what I love about Run Club is people. They constantly keep us updated on what's going on, and I mean, she's just another example of. She lives on the other side of the country, but I feel like, and I've met Heather several times, but you feel like we know these people. Yeah. They're part of our family now, and that's the cool thing about what we get to do here.
It is. And I like the way she puts it. I got to run.
Yeah.
I wish we could keep that feeling that we have when we get to this point. When you've been off for a while and you get a chance to get back to it, it's a good feeling to get back out there. This past week, I think I've kind of, I became a lot less fit over the last couple of months because of an injury and some stuff I was dealing with. And this past week, I could feel that shift. I could feel my body, and it just feels so good. And it's like you're eager to get out there and run when things feel good and when you want to get back to it. And we should be that way all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
The morning temperatures here aren't hurting anything either.
No, that helps a lot.
We're starting to get that sweet time of year.
Yeah. And our spiritual journey is very similar, right? When we first develop that relationship with Christ, we get really excited about it, and then it kind of it feels stale after a while, unless you purposefully go out there and make it exciting again. And or we go and we hear a sermon, and that sermon gets us, and we get jacked up again, and we get excited about it again. And the parallels again are amazing. Speaking
of a good sermon, I don't know if I've ever talked about this young man on here or not, but there's a young man who his name is Jeb Brooker. If you've ever been to the weekend here in Dalton, and you've had the Brooker Brothers barbecue, one of the Brooker brothers is his father. But I had Jeb in small groups when he was in high school. I had him on small groups on Wednesday night, and he's always been a great young man. Just always, he was the football guy in high school. The football star, loud, rambunctious, just that kind of young man. And But he got saved a year and a half ago. Just radical transformation. His testimony, he basically said, I was living a lie. Everybody thought I was a good kid, but I wanted nothing to do with the things of God. And this is coming from a young man who's in a family who has a deep history in our church and really this whole community. And but lately he's been preaching some.
Yeah.
His father-in-law is a pastor, and so last night he was preaching. He sent me a text yesterday morning and said, I'm preaching at my church tonight. You want to come? And so, I was not going to not do that.
Yeah.
And so I went. Holly and the boys, they had other things to do because it was kind of last minute. So I kind of changed my schedule and made it there. And Dean, I walked in and he was pacing. He was just visibly, as anybody
nervous
would be. I can only imagine if I had to preach. And so he was pacing. Just kind of pale complexion. You could tell it was weighing on him. And I knelt down with him before the service and I prayed with him. And but Dean, if you don't believe in God, the Holy Spirit, all you have to do is look at his life.
Yeah.
It's like when he got behind that pulpit, a switch flipped.
Yeah.
And he preached the word. It was, Jeb has it was a very old time Southern Baptist preacher feel.
Yeah.
But he's 22 years old.
Yeah. And
the Holy Spirit was just all over him. He preached on, I must decrease so he can increase. Talking about John the Baptist. And just, he went for 30 minutes and just absolutely passionate. There was veins sticking out of his neck. He was just that intense. And when he got done, it was almost like Jeb came back.
Yeah.
And it was just, it was an incredible thing to watch. And I don't know, it was just...
That's really cool. You know what I think's interesting about that? Didn't he have a YouTube channel where he did some hunting stuff?
Yeah, he's kind of he kind of reminds you his YouTube videos. This was really kind of during the Duck Dynasty days, and he did that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, isn't it funny how God prepares us, right? Yeah. Think about how he used that to develop that ability.
I hadn't even
to
thought
speak.
about that.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
But kudos to Jeb. He said in his sermon last night, he said, I want the call to preach.
Yeah.
You can tell he wants to do it. And this is kind of the point of his whole sermon. He wants to do it. He wants to go into, it seems like, to preaching. But he doesn't have the freedom to do that yet. And so you can tell he's really struggling with what he wants versus what God's calling his life today is. And he said, today, I don't have that freedom, but man, when he does get that freedom,
it's going to be good.
It's going to be real good.
Wow.
And so kudos to Jeb. Love you, buddy. He's just made me proud to be a small part of his life through the years.
Well, and kudos to you for pouring into him like you did for years.
Yeah.
That's had an impact on him. he acknowledged as much, and that's a pretty special thing to be able to see that. Because a lot of times, you do and you say a lot of things and you wonder if it's ever getting through, and clearly your words had impact. So that's good.
Yeah.
We had a trivia question from last week, and it was this. FloJo's records are very old, but they're not the oldest records on the book. What is the oldest record in track and field? And most people probably won't know this, but I can remember even when I was back in high school and college, I remember seeing this lady's name on the record books. Her name was Jarmila Kradokvilova. Kind of hard to say, but she was Czechoslovakian. It's the women's 800 meters, set in 1983. She ran 153 way back then, and nobody has been close since. We have had a few, I think, dip into the 154s, but it's probably high 154s. And so nobody has really, but we've got a few that are really coming on strong right now.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's the oldest one. And then there's another one that was set in 85 that's been out there for a long time. A lady by the name of Marita Koch, the women's 400 from East Germany. She ran 47.60. So those are two of the oldest women's track records. Of course, FloJo did hers in 1988. She still holds the record for the 100 and the 200 meters. And those, though, we've had some within just a few hundredths of a second of those over the last couple of years. So maybe those will be broken. I think that all of these records are going to be broken in the next few years, because I think as tracks get better, as the shoes get better, I just think they're going to be able to get closer to him. The oldest field record, if you're wondering, the oldest field record is the men's discus, Jürgen Schult from 1986. He was from East Germany. And then the oldest men's running record is the 3,000 meters. And that's Daniel Komen. Of course, that event's not run very often, so you almost have to set up a special meet to break that record. And then, of course, of the regular events that you see all the time, Hisham El Garouj still holds the records for the 1,500 and the mile. And that he did that in the late 90s. I think 98, 99, maybe both in the 99. But we saw Ingebrigtsen come close recently in the mile. Mm-hmm. He ran a 2 mile. He broke the world record in the 2 mile that equivalency wise was faster than the 3,000 meter time. So it's just a matter of time, I think, before he probably breaks that. Of course, there are some elephants in the room when we talk about all of this, because there's a lot of speculation about performance-enhancing drugs in almost all of these cases and all these circumstances. Not all, but most. But especially when it comes to the East German, the Czechoslovakians, the Soviet Union records of the 80s. Some of those, we know, the East Germans in particular, all of that was uncovered after the fact, that we know they had these labs where they were churning them out like machinery at one time, but they never failed any drug tests. Right. Of course, testing wasn't as good back then, but we just have to live with those records being on the book. So it's going to feel really good when those records get broken. And of course, the other elephant is, and I mentioned a minute ago, super shoes. They have definitely made a difference, more so in the distance running than the sprinters, but they're definitely making a big impact on what's going on. And we're going to talk a little bit more about super shoes.
And that's happened in pretty rapid succession.
Yeah.
We're coming up on the weekend, and I know because I'm always out of town this weekend, the weekend that Kipchoge broke 2 hours. Was that 3 or 4 years ago? 5?
Oh, it's been a while back. I don't know what.
I know it's next weekend.
It was before. It was before 2020, right? So
yeah, that's true.
So it had to be.
It's been longer than I thought.
Yeah, at least 4 years ago.
But yeah, still that whole. It's like that was when Kipchoge did it. It was, the newest great, and now it's like every brand is going to that technology. Even the non-carbon shoes. I've showed you my shoes.
Yep.
They're experimenting with the foam and things like that. So yeah, they're every time you get a pair of shoes now, it's like some of the technology is different.
Well, in the studies, actually, they did a really good study probably about a year ago that showed that actually the biggest difference between shoes is not the carbon. It's the foam. Yeah. That makes a bigger difference. So yeah, good stuff. Would you like to experience the Bible in a different way than you've ever done before? Well, you can join me, Coach Dean, as I read through the entire Bible every day for a full year. You don't want to miss hearing this transplanted Southern boy try to pronounce those biblical names now, do you? It may be good for a laugh. In addition, I share running and walking tips and some inspirational quotes along the way. Get your daily dose of the Bible from a runner's perspective in the Run for God Run Club Walk Through the Bible. You must be a member of the Run Club to get access. So if you're not a member, join today. If you are a member, just find a Walk Through the Bible under the Nationwide Challenge tab. All right, we're back. And, we had this article from womensrunning.com. This is just a few little pieces of the article, and I thought this would be a cool story to share. Boulder, Colorado. Area elite runner Neely Gracie, 33, set a new stroller mile world record of 5 minutes and 24.17 seconds on Friday in front of a hearty crowd at the Englewood High School track in Denver. The previous stroller mile run record was 5 minutes and 57 seconds set in July 2022 by Sally On of the United Kingdom. In early 2022, Gracie saw an article about a dad who had set the men's stroller mile world record in a time of 4:31, and being a professional runner, Gracie's competitive juices started flowing, wondering what the current stroller mile world record was for women at the time. Gracie ran the record with her youngest son in the stroller with a helmet on for safety because he weighs the least and will be using the Guava Family Rome model stroller. Gracie shares that she wants her kids to grow up seeing a healthy lifestyle and aiming for big goals as normal. Gracie is now entirely focused on the Olympic trials for the marathon in February 2024 in Orlando, Florida, the training for which will undoubtedly include logging many miles with her kiddos along for the ride.
That's a great story.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
I got a record for everything these days, don't they?
They do. Yeah.
But I like that. It was cool that she's a pretty elite runner, and for her to see that and go, hey, that's pretty cool. I think I want to do that.
So I'm assuming it said in front of a hearty crowd at
Boulder,
Colorado high school track. So she did this on a track.
Yeah.
That would be hard with a stroller. Turning. Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to run, straight down that road in front of us right here, pushing a stroller, but that's got to be, you can't do it for your first time.
Yeah, that is true. Although,
especially because to run that kind of time, she's obviously running on the inside lane.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty tight turn.
Yeah. Yeah, stroller technology has certainly gotten a lot better. Especially they make strollers that are specifically made not for necessarily running on a track, but running. And so,
but usually the front wheel's fixed.
Usually,
at least the ones.
Yeah, I wonder about this
and
one.
So, I remember the ones when the boys were little. You kind of had to pick it up a little to turn.
Yeah, it's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
So, I don't know. That's I'd like to see a video of that.
Huh. Well, we need to finish a story that we started many weeks back. Elizabeth Morey, if you remember back in episode 162, she shared her story, and she mentioned at the time that it wasn't complete.
Right.
And now she has shared the rest of her story, and it is called Run for God, Growing Through the Valley. This story is my follow-up to episode 162 in the Run for God podcast. Check it out if you haven't already. The ongoing themes: looking to be healed, wanting to be accepted, needing to feel loved and valued. I already had all of these, but I realized I had been looking for them in the wrong places. Despite wanting to go to my own directions, God continues to prove His way is best and He is enough. I know and believe this. So why did I seek direction and approval from my husband over God's? I wanted instant gratification and acceptance for what I was doing, even when I knew God was calling me to something different. Instead, I allowed fear to guide me and what-ifs to cloud my judgment of what God had in store for me. This past year, I've been faced with many setbacks, but looking back, God was there every step of the way. A guiding scripture during this time was Psalm 23. This famous psalm is usually read at funerals or at one's deathbed. I'm now convinced God meant these words to encourage an active, healthy, abundant life in the here and now rather than at the end of our lives. This beautiful poem, written by the former shepherd boy David, who led scared, helpless sheep, emanates God's character and the ultimate good shepherd. He cares, loves, guides, and protects us, often from ourselves. I was that sheep. Reluctantly, I ignored the good Lord's teaching, stubbornly doing things my own way or what I thought my husband wanted. Every day this past year, I walked into the unknowns, exposing myself to hurt and pain, going into a place that I utterly hated. My anxiety and pain became overwhelming, taking me to my breaking point. Never in my life have I felt so uneasy and alone. I could completely relate to that valley described in Psalm 23. But our Good Shepherd won't leave us in that valley. Psalm 23 also holds the perfect promise for what we need when walking through the valley. It's not a place we're supposed to call home, but a place to learn, grow, and move on. Through this valley, God was refining me and showing me how to trust Him. My first and last day of this factory salary position, aka the valley, was June 19th, 2023. The decision to quit became painfully obvious after yet another leave of absence due to my work-related hand injury. It was time to sever the cord of discontentment and trust in God that everything will work out. The day I left, I felt relieved and finally stress-free. How could this be, since I just walked out on a consistent, necessary source of income? Now what? God is what. I reached out to my former boss, who already knew the situation, having listened to my Run for God podcast, part 1. 2 days later, I started working for him again. He didn't question any of my bad choices that led me to where I stood that day. Instead, he showed me grace and words filled with love that ministered to my aching heart. All he said was, "Why didn't you call sooner?" While I knew this was only a temporary stop in my journey, God used my boss to lead and guide me into my next assignment. During this time, I felt freed to focus and look to God for wisdom and guidance. 30 days later, God revealed my next assignment and provided exactly what I need. Backtracking just a bit, we had already planned, booked, and paid for 2 vacations and 2 upcoming surgeries. How was I able to start a new job with so much going on? God had paved the way. In one interview, He took care of all my time off plus 2 weeks paid vacation with a job right here in town. He answered all my questions and more in that one interview and confirmed this was the path I was to take. Honestly, I'm thankful for these trials, as it's made me the woman I am today. Having my eyes fixed on Jesus, I can say with confidence, He leads me beside still waters and restores my soul. Choose joy, even on the hard days. Those trials won't last forever. Take time in the valley to look up and see He had you right where you needed to be, growing, learning, and trusting Him.
Wow. Elizabeth, that's a great follow-up to your already great story, and I love how transparent she is.
Yeah.
I know that's probably hard to write.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Both her stories
I'm
were
sure.
hard to write, but I have no doubt that there's people out there that need to hear them. There's parts of it that I needed to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's why it's so important that we share these.
Yeah. And if you haven't heard the story, again, from the previous podcast, let's just say what she said, and she kind of alludes to it here, but bottom line is she went and she took a job at the factory where her husband worked, and it was a kind of a premium job. It was one of those higher paying jobs in that area, and so it just seemed like a no-brainer. If you had the opportunity to be hired at this place, then you went there because that's the place where everybody wanted to be. But it wasn't the place for her. Mm-hmm. And it took her some time of just not being happy in what she was doing until she figured that out. And God made it clear to her. And that's when she decided to ultimately do what she did here.
And that's the hard part in a lot of situations we go through. It's like we take this job, or we're doing this thing, or we have this position that everybody would love to have that, or you think that everybody would love to have that. And so you start feeling God calling on your life saying this isn't the right thing, and you start to feel that guilt. Like, well, this is, people would love to have this position.
Right.
And I'm unhappy, so you start to feel some kind of guilt. But that's where we go off the rails. Mm-hmm. That's where we're going to get down into it in the questions. We start to worry more about what others are thinking and what you feel like you should think, rather than what God's calling on your life. And that is a very miserable place to be. I've been there.
Yeah, I have too.
You're fighting between what you think is right, what society says is right, what you've known all your life. This is where I'm supposed to be. But God's saying, no, it's not. You're supposed to be right here. And to walk away from something that everybody, and in Elizabeth's case, there's plenty of people in her town that would love to have that job. And to walk away from it, it almost feels reckless.
Right.
But it's not. It's reckless for Christ.
Yep. And I think this story plays out far more often than anyone wants to admit. Yeah. I know that a lot of people, they feel trapped in their circumstances, right? They feel like, well, I can't quit this job because if I do, all my finances are going to fall apart. I can't get out of this situation with this person because all these tragic things are going to happen. And people feel trapped. Yeah. But the truth is God, I went through this same thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can listen to the still small voice, or God can give you a boot like he did with you.
He did. He absolutely did.
And he did with me. Yep. I was starting this out, and he allowed the housing crash to kind of slow my schedule down to allow me to do this. Because I've said it many times. I look back at 2008, and I thank God for it now, even though I get it. Many people and families were hurt by that recession. But looking back, if I have to be honest with myself, I don't know that this ministry would have ever started had that not happened. Yeah. If things would have stayed good.
That's just amazing to watch God work. And, with me, I went to a job paying way less than I was making, which again, it's kind of like Elizabeth here, just, doing something that the world would say doesn't make any sense.
You're in HR in Dalton, Georgia in a carpet mill. That's a cushy job.
Yeah.
Why would you walk away from that, Dean?
Right. That would be crazy, right?
That's what people would say.
Yep. But I'll share a few things here. I just thought about, so what is better in my life right now compared with at that time? First of all, I'm happier doing my job, just in general. I sleep better.
Sure.
That's a great thing right there. Just to be able to rest better. The difference also is, and here's what a lot of people miss, and this is kind of getting down into the weeds with this a little bit, but I think it's important because very often, in my case, I work from home now for the most part, right? I do a lot of work from home, and so I don't have to go out and buy a bunch of clothes. I save a lot of money.
We were just talking about our wardrobe before the podcast. It's pretty simple nowadays.
It's pretty simple, right? I'm not going out to eat lunch every day. Yeah. I'm eating lunch at home. That's way cheaper, right? There's so many ways that you'd be amazed at how much cheaper you can live in better circumstances. Right. And then, of course, I feel like my life has way more purpose. I felt like what I was doing before was an important job. Somebody needed to do it and it was important, but I feel like, what I'm doing now is so much bigger because I'm doing what God wants me to do. And that's the most important thing. Yeah. And guess what? No money issues. I don't have any money issues. I haven't had a single one. None.
Making half of what you used to make, and
it's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. So I know how she feels to some degree, and it's great to hear that happiness in her voice because I understand it. And, she missed some running adventures during that time too. So hopefully she can get back to those running adventures her and her husband were doing when they were doing all those ultra marathons and stuff.
Yeah.
So I hope that's the case. Looking forward to seeing that. Galatians 1:10 says, "For do I now persuade men or God? Or do I seek to please men? For if I still pleased men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ."
So, again, we talk about Scripture being living. And I read this verse in a way this morning that I've never read it before. And for me, it was speaking to me about our schedules, because our schedules say a lot about who we are and where our loyalties lie. It says a lot. Our schedule says a lot about who we serve, and I think we do most of what Galatians 1:10. At least nowadays, we do this with our schedules. And I really try to take inventory of this often. You know how I am. I don't like to get my schedule too crowded. Yeah. And society says, well, that's kind of lazy.
Yeah.
That's a lazy statement to make.
True.
You could do more. And I could do more. But I could do more good things. But too many good things means that you're often effective at none of them.
Yeah.
I had a talk with Lane last night about this very thing, about, he had some concerns about his schedule, and he was naming off all these things, and it was all good stuff. Mm-hmm. And I said, but you got to cut some of those good things back, because you got to start with your goal. You got to start with your just cause. You and I are reading a book right now about our just cause, and we're talking about it in the form of business and ministry, but you got to have one for your life. Yeah. Right. And as a Christian, I want to shine the light of Jesus in all that I do and help others to see him in my life. So that's goal number one, right?
Right.
So then you've got to start taking inventory of the things that what does your schedule say? Does your schedule back that up? And so I start thinking about, there's the top three that you can't take out of your schedule. Family. Well, I try to model Christ through my family. I try to, and I fail sometimes, but I try to have a household where as for me and my house, we serve the Lord. Your job. I mean, we got to have a job, right?
Right.
And so I feel like we do that here. I feel like that every week when we get on behind these microphones, we're trying to shine Jesus. Sure, we have a good time doing it, but Scripture says doesn't say you have to be miserable doing this. Right. We have a good time doing it. Church, that's obvious. Or you say it's obvious because we can take on too many things at church.
Yeah.
And so we become ineffective at that. I mean, I think about committees. I mean, we're both in Baptist churches, and it's Committeeville sometimes.
Yeah.
But then downtime, you start thinking about, reading and listening to an edifying podcast or book. Is that advancing my just cause? Well, yes.
Yeah.
And social media.
Yeah.
10% yes, 90% no. Yeah. Watching a sunrise or a sunset. I mean, you think about it. In our society today, that would be an absolute waste of time to sit there for 30 minutes, but it's not.
Yeah.
Walking or running, yes, that's it. That's advancing. Most television, no. So you've got to start. You got to take inventory of your life. And I know it seems so elementary, but we don't do it.
No.
You got to list the things out that takes your time, and then you start striking out what doesn't advance your just cause. And then what doesn't advance your just cause, or what advances your just cause the least. And you got to find that sweet spot. But, we got, you and I, we're going to talk about this more, but we're not people pleasers. We don't struggle with this as much as some. My wife, on the other hand, she has a heart of gold. Debbie's probably the same way. They have a heart of gold, and they want to see everybody happy and pleased. Yep. But there comes a time where we have to do what Galatians 1:10 says. We have to please God. We have to be a bondservant of God and not a servant of our schedules.
Yeah, unfortunately, these days we operate sort of like the politicians do. They take a poll and decide what they need to do. Yeah. And these days, a lot of times we're polling people to find out what we need to do, not in an official way, but in an unofficial way. And unfortunately, we can't poll God. He doesn't answer to polls, and he tells us what we need to do in a general way in the Bible, but in a more specific way, he'll tell us what we need to do, but it's not through a poll. Sure. It's through the Holy Spirit. Question: what does your life show? Are you trying to please men over God? Of course, we all have moments, right, where we do that because that's where our focus is, because that's kind of what's in our face. Mm-hmm. You have to look for God. God doesn't get in your face. Well, sometimes he does, but he doesn't always get right in your face. Right. He wants you to have that choice. He wants you to choose him, not others. And so the question is, I don't worry about what other people think about what I'm doing. I just never have. You mentioned that a minute ago. But the real question is, am I doing what God wants me to do? Okay. I don't care what people think. That's not going to force me in a direction or in one direction or another. But I do care what God thinks, and that's where I need to be based, right?
Yeah.
So we have to do two things. You have to not care what others think, and you have to care what God thinks. You have to do both of those things in order to be on the right trail.
Right.
Psalm 32, 8 and 9 says, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will guide you with my eye. Do not be like the horse or like the mule, which have no understanding, which must be harnessed with bit and bridle, else they will not come near you.
Let's pause right there, because I got something to say about that verse, but I want to go back for just a second, because I think you and I think the same way on that. And I know exactly what you're saying, but I want to make clear our heart. It's not that we don't care what other people think.
Yeah.
It's we're not persuaded as much as some by what people say. I do care what people think. I care. Like, we've had this debate as a family. Lane and Landon's youth pastor sent me something last night. He said, I want to include this in the Hollis Nightly debates, because this is what we do. I mean, as a family, we really get into the weeds on things, and we kind of have been talking about this lately. I do care that what others think about, I don't know, let's just take a hot button topic. And we're not going to dive in, but abortion.
Right.
I do care that somebody thinks abortion should be legal all the way up to the time of birth. I do care.
Right.
But I'm not persuaded by that.
Right.
I know where I stand. I know what God says. I know where my conviction lies. And so while I do care, I'm not going to give that a platform in my life.
Right.
And I think that's the difference. That's the way we should say it, because to say I don't care what they think, that's not what we're saying.
Yeah, and it's a good point. I'll give you a good example of a place where we don't care. Okay, so I took recently, when I get through running, usually I'll run before the kids have practice, right? So I'll get in a run, I'll be all sweaty. And if I get back in my truck all sweaty, the bottom 6 inches of my t-shirt gets soaking wet, because my shorts are soaking wet. A lot of times I'll run without a shirt on, or if I do, I'll change my shirt, but I still have wet shorts. And it drives me crazy. I can't stand for that, just that bottom section of my shirt. So I cut off a couple of t-shirts right at the waistline of my shorts. It looks goofy.
I was going to say, I haven't seen this yet.
It looks like a 1980s throwback shirt, right?
Cut off shirt. And but you know what? That's where it doesn't matter to me whether people think that's crazy. That's what I mean by not caring. Yeah. I just wanted to clarify that there are things that we can come across as not caring. And this was our debate as a family, is sometimes I come across is I don't care what the other side thinks.
Yeah.
And that is maybe what I say, but that is not my heart. I do care, because I want them to come to my side.
Right.
But I'm not going to be persuaded to go to the other side. But where we got to be careful, and where this whole debate with our family started, was you got to be careful. You got to be prayed up, and you better be firm in your convictions before you go over to the other side to have that conversation.
That's
because
right.
just as much as I want to persuade them to come to my side,
they want to persuade.
And the minute you say I can't be persuaded, that's when you get in trouble.
Oh yeah.
It's just like my pastor. I think I've said it on here. He will not say I will never cheat on my wife. He won't say it, because he knows that's the point where we get arrogance in our own. Now, to say with God's help, I will never cheat on my wife, then that's okay. But we have to understand that is dangerous.
That's right.
When we make those kind of statements. But we're going down a rabbit trail. Anyway, we do care what other people think. We're just not persuaded by what they think. Okay, Psalm 32. I will instruct you, teach you. Do not be like a horse harnessed with a bridle and bit. I thought about something, and I don't think we've talked about this on here, but the idea of indoctrination. This verse is basically saying, be indoctrinated.
Yeah.
Is with me. And we had I think I've mentioned we're doing a family Bible study at our church. And so it's all ages in there. And Thomas, who's doing a great job with it, he said a few weeks ago, he said, we live in a society where so many parents are saying, I want my kids to find their own way. And we've made indoctrination this bad word.
Yeah.
And he said, indoctrination is scriptural.
Amen.
And you better indoctrinate your kids.
Yep.
Or else somebody will.
Yep.
I think we've already talked about this. And I feel like I'm repeating myself because we talked about Kaz's statement of it's the race to the heart of a child.
Yeah.
But I want to say it again because I think that's what Psalm 32 is saying. It's we can put somebody else's bridle and bit in our mouth.
Yeah.
Or we can be led by God. But as far as our kids and those around us, it doesn't have to be our kids, but people in the workplace, you need to look at them as it's a race. Somebody's not a believer. Well, they're being pulled away. It's our job to pull them too.
Yeah. I read this one a little bit different this time. What I got out of this was God doesn't want to physically force us to do something. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to put a bit in our mouth and physically force us to do something. He wants us to be persuaded by who He is,
right,
rather than by force. And that's an important thing. It's an important distinction. Another question. Have you refused to be obedient to God's leading or guidance for your own pursuit?
Elizabeth's just meddling here.
Boy, she is, isn't she? I see this all the time as a coach, I see athletes doing things they're not supposed to do. And I know they're not doing things the way they're supposed to do them. And it drives me crazy. Not because I need my ego fed by somebody doing what I ask them to do, but because I know they would be happier if they would do what I ask them to do, because I know the outcome's going to be better. And yet they still don't do it. But and I think, why are they doing that? That's crazy. But I'm doing the same thing with God all the time.
Sure.
Right? All the time. I'm not doing what I know I'm supposed to do because reasons, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we don't even have a good reason for it most of the time. It's just what we want to do.
Yeah.
And we've got to get away from that, boy. I can't fathom God's disappointment in me sometimes, because I see these kids going astray, whether it's your children or the kids you coach. I see them going astray and how much it hurts sometimes, because you just want them to get it. And I think about God looking at me the same way and think, boy. Yeah,
and I think I'm seeing that more and more now. I mean, when you have young kids, I mean, you can kind of tell them what to do. When you got about to be 21-year-old.
Yeah.
And Lane, don't hear what I'm not saying. Lane is an incredible young man, but I'm having to learn to bite my tongue.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of going back to the Psalm 32. God doesn't want to force us to do anything. He wants us to do what is right in our own strength and our own power. He wants us to choose to do right. And that's where, having older children, it's just another model of Christ's relationship with us. Our relationship with our kids should model that.
Yeah.
And this is where it starts to come to the parent now. It's like, how is God dealing with me? He's not forcing me to do anything.
Yeah.
He's allowing me to make my own bed. And there comes a time with your kids, and you have to do that.
Yeah.
And like I said, you want to just grab your kid at that age and say, okay, here's what you need to do.
Right. But it doesn't
work that way.
Yeah.
It's got to be their will.
It does. Psalm 23:4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. I love the way Elizabeth describes this in her story in saying that we are walking through the valley. We're not camped out there. We don't stay there. We're traveling through these bad times. And what I see a lot of people doing is they get in the valley and they walk back and forth in the valley, right? Instead of looking for, because what we really need to be looking for when we're in that valley is we need to be looking for that path that angles upward, right? It's a hard path. It's going to get harder in order to get out. You're going to have to climb out of the valley, but it's totally worth it. And it's where we need to go. And we need to be looking for that path while we're in that valley. And so often we wander around in the valley thinking that maybe I can get out of this valley on this flat ground. And it typically doesn't work that way. Last question. Will you trust God to lead you when all seems lost? We say yes, right? But we all know that we have those times where we're going to question God and we're going to get in our own way. And it's like those athletes that I was talking about. If I ask them ahead of time, I'll give you a good example. Last week, I had a kid. I asked them before the workout. I gave them their paces they needed to hit. And I said, do you guys feel like you can hit these paces? And nobody raised their hand and said, no, I don't think I can. I said, if you don't think you can, raise your hand right now. And then I said, okay, so everybody feels like you can hit your paces. Well, we got through with that workout, and one of the kids came up to me later and said, man, I didn't think there was any way I was going to be able to hit those paces. But I did. But the point is that they said they were trusting me, right? He said he was trusting me, but clearly in his mind, he wasn't. Right? In his mind, he was doing something else. It turned out great, but that's a lot of times with God. We say that we trust God, but then our actions reveal something else.
Yeah, I've got this picture in my head, and I'm going to try to get it out, but it kind of going back to the athlete and kind of going back to our walk with Christ. I mean, it seems like, you know how when an athlete is really struggling, you know, they want to do good, but they're really struggling. They can't figure. I'm thinking of Landon right now. You know, there's just things he's struggling. Well, Landon comes to you. Athletes will come to you. Hey, Dean, I can't figure this out. I need help with this. But think about the athletes who have had success, but you know that there's more in them. Many times they are the ones that are least receptive.
You're right.
They've got some success. They get a little bit of arrogance and they think, Dean, I've been doing it this way. I've got success. Just leave me alone.
Yeah.
But when that same athlete hits a rough patch, where do they come? They come to Dean.
Yep.
Dean, man, I know what you said, but I'm struggling now. We see that all the time.
Yep.
But we do that all the time.
Yes, we do.
We get on that mountaintop and it's like, I got it from here, God. God knows God knows we're on top of Grassy Mountain, but he sees Mount Everest.
Yeah.
You know, just beyond the horizon. And he knows we can get there, but we get comfortable in everything we're doing, and then we think we've got it. We've never got it. Yeah. And the minute we think we've got it, that's when something bad's about to happen. And if we would just praise God on the mountaintops, we might be in a lot less valleys.
You're right.
I don't know why that came to mind about the whole athlete thing, because we've seen that in the past. They get a little success and it's like, I'm going to do this my way, Dean.
That's right. Well said.
Yeah.
Do you struggle with motivation to exercise? Are you looking for something that will challenge you and inspire and motivate you? The Run for God Run Club is just what you need to get off the couch and on your way to a fitter, healthier you. Stop trying to get into better shape and do it. With the help and inspiration of thousands of others who are going through the same challenges you face. Whether you're participating in the Couch to Marathon Challenge or just looking for a daily pick-me-up to get active, join the Run for God Run Club today. You can join for as little as 27 cents a day. So what are you waiting for? Get started today at www.runforgod.com. www.runforgod.com.
So we're back. You know, what people probably don't know is we do weird things when we're in the middle of a break. I was sitting here killing 2 flies.
You got them.
I've got a fly swatter if you're watching.
Yeah.
So we have fun.
Yeah.
We always have fun, Dean.
Absolutely. Well, let's see what you think here. This sounds like such a triathlete thing.
What are you saying?
Geeks. Triathletes are geeks.
That's true.
Biosensors. Have you heard of these? There is now a $25 sensor that sticks to your arm that analyzes your sweat rate. So when you connect it to an app, it tells you what you need to replace your sweat with and how much. You need to drink 4 ounces of electrolyte, Gatorade, or 4 ounces of water. It tells you what you need to drink to get your everything back in balance. And they've had things like this in the past, but they've never been affordable. Like only the biggest and maybe some with some really deep pockets could do it. Well, this is called the GX Sweat Patch, and it is it's available, like I said, for $25. What do you think about that?
10 years ago, I would have probably been all about it. Today, I'm not. They got the things that diabetics wear nowadays that monitors your blood sugar. Yep. Athletes are wearing those now.
Yeah.
They don't have diabetes or anything, but they're monitoring their blood sugar. And I get it. I do, but this is where I start feeling like an old man,
Yeah.
We're getting to the point where, to me, the best way to monitor sweat loss, blood sugar, all that kind of stuff, is to learn to recognize the red flags from feeling it.
Yep.
I remember when I was doing the very long stuff, and I knew when my electrolytes were dropping.
Yep.
I could sense it. I could see it in my vision. My vision would start to change. But you got all these sensors on you now. You don't learn to experience those things, because if you never learn to experience those things, what happens when that thing goes out? Which it's gonna go out. It's gonna have glitchy things. It's just like the whole heart rate monitor. We've had this debate in the past. I see the benefits of heart rate monitors for looking back. I don't agree with doing a workout based solely on a heart rate monitor. Sometimes, yes, but you need to learn to feel the intensity by which you're training. And, you need to be able to know if you're going anaerobic without a heart rate monitor.
Yep.
That is a very defined line that you can feel, but you have to, that's a learned thing. You have to learn that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't need a heart rate monitor to tell me when I go anaerobic. I can feel it.
Yeah. I think about it from a pace standpoint. These days, our kids, they can't run at a particular pace because they've got these GPS watches that tell, and they'll speed up or slow down and pay attention to their GPS watch. I know what a pace feels like,
and that's something we taught
for years.
Our athletes.
Yeah,
we used to take your watch off, and you need to hit this pace within 2 seconds on a lap around the track, and we made them learn how to experience a pace rather than go by what their GPS is. Now it's fine to have all that stuff. That's not what I'm saying, but we've always said that is good data to look back on, not to train for.
Yeah. Well, this GX sweat patch sounds cool, but there's a few red flags for me. First of all, they said in the article, the only thing we have today is going by your thirst. Well, unfortunately, the studies say thirst is enough. So that's number one. It may not be the most optimal thing, but thirst is a pretty good indicator, according to the studies. Number two, they said that anything over 2% body weight loss will make your body go, in quotation marks, haywire.
That's not true.
But the evidence shows that top marathoners are routinely 6 to 10% dehydrated when they finish their races. So that's just not true. They
don't run in the South in the summer.
No, they don't. No, they don't. But most importantly, here's the thing, and this is the biggest one. The device is made by the makers of Gatorade. So I wonder...
You always got to look at who writes these studies.
I wonder what it's going to tell you should drink. But it does sound like a pretty cool device. But, you know me. I'm not... I think that hydration is a simple thing. And so, not a big deal to me.
All of this stuff is simple.
It
really.
It really is. That's a good point. All right, it's time for Dean's Thoughts. That's time when I share something that I've written about the intersection between running and faith. Well, have you ever heard of Rick Barry, the basketball player? This one's called Rick Barry Decisions. Rick Barry played professional basketball from 1965 to 1980. His 36.3 points per game scoring average in NBA Finals are still the most in history. He was a leader on every team he played for and usually the leading scorer on that team. He also has 5 children who have played in the NBA. His legacy is enormous. However, he is not usually brought up when discussing the all-time greats like Jordan, Kobe, Shaq, Bird, Magic, or LeBron. That is until you talk about free throws. When Rick Barry retired from professional basketball, he had the highest made free throw percentage in NBA history. Today, he still ranks 4th all time. He was a free throw making machine. But there was something odd about Rick Barry's free throws. He shot them underhand, granny style, some people call it. You might say, well, that's back in the 1970s. Things were different back then. But even then, no one was doing it. And still today, no one shoots free throws the way Rick Barry does it. I have a theory for why. There are no kids today who would be caught shooting their free throws granny style. Of course, if you don't practice that way, you'll never get good at it. So no one will ever shoot free throws like Rick Barry did, probably. Now, I'm not claiming that this is a better way to shoot free throws. Obviously, it was for Rick Barry, but the sad truth is that there are probably some poor free throw shooters who might be better if they shot like he did, but we'll never know. I think there's an important lesson we can learn from Rick Barry's free throws. It's okay to be different. He didn't care what anyone else said about his technique. He just kept moving forward with what he thought was best for him. Ultimately, he became one of the best free throw shooters of all time. Is there something that you could be doing that you don't do because you don't want people to talk about it? Are you afraid to go to the local track and do a track workout because you don't look like the others who are there? Do you not run around your neighborhood because no one else does it and you would feel weird doing it? Are you intimidated by someone who says what you're doing is not real running? Whatever your circumstances are, don't let what others think about you become a stumbling block to your success. Rick Barry tuned out the naysayers. Admittedly, it's easier to do when you're literally the best at what you're doing, but his focus was on doing his best, and that should be our focus too. The same can be said to witnessing to non-believers. Are you intimidated by the thought of sharing what Christ has done in your life in a bold and open way? Are there times when you know God wants you to speak up, but you feel inadequate to do it? I think there comes a time for all of us when we have those Rick Barry decisions. Are we going to let what others think and say about our faith to deter us from God's mission for our lives? Or are we going to carry out that mission despite what others think or say about us? Rick Barry was a true one-of-a-kind. His willingness to buck the trend is a lesson to us all that good things can still happen when we're different. Sometimes they happen because we're different. If being different is holding you back in any way, whether with your running or walking or on your spiritual journey, don't be afraid to be bold and do what you know is the right thing to do. Be a Rick Barry. Don't be afraid to be unique.
I love that story, Dean.
Did you know Rick Barry?
I've never heard of Rick Barry.
Son of a gun.
But yeah, I think I've been Rick Barry.
Yeah.
All my life. You and me both.
True.
Yeah.
I asked some high schoolers recently if they knew who Rick Barry was, and they looked at me like I was crazy. You know, like, whoa, what in the world? Who is that?
I think this is one of those things. I think this concept of what you're talking about here, maybe there are young people who get this early on, but I think this is one of those things that you really do learn with age. I mean, the concept that if somebody comes up to you and says, well, you're not a real runner.
Yeah.
That says nothing about you and everything about them.
Yep.
And I think if when we get to that point, it's kind of the whole I don't care what other people think. We kind of get to that point in life. A lot of people say it's the grumpy old man stage, which I'm happy to be there in my 40s. But that is very freeing. And especially if you get there because of your relationship with Christ. You know, it's the reason we make statements like, I don't care what they think about abortion. Well, it's not that I don't care. It's I'm firmly planted in the truth.
Right.
And so, yeah, I don't know how to. It's the Rick Barry syndrome, I guess. He knew what was right for him.
Yep.
And it was obvious what was right for him. He had success for what was right for him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know that living for Christ is right for me. I've had success living for Christ. Maybe not monetarily, but we've just discussed it with you and your situation. It's not about the money.
Yep.
When you can get to that point in your life that it's about Christ. You know, this is what Jeb was preaching on last night.
Yep.
It's not about me.
Yep.
It's about Christ. When we can get there. Now, do I slide back from that every now and then? Yes. But the overall arching theme, if it's all about Christ, then you don't care how ridiculous you look.
Yeah.
Because we're living out the Rick Barry. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm kind of jumbling my words, but I love this story.
It's all good.
You did a great job on it.
These high school kids, the peer pressure
it is.
And the
social
worrying
media
about what everybody else thinks is so, I mean, those kids are not going to be caught dead doing something that other people don't think is cool.
Yeah.
You know, oh my goodness. And I understand it. I understand. I know why they think that way. I don't think that way. Matter of fact, I don't know that I've ever been much like that. Even when I was their age, I wasn't really much of a, but here's the thing. It's one thing for kids to be that way, but we have a lot of adults listening to this.
Yeah.
As adults, we should not be that way, period.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we just shouldn't. And if we are that way, we should take an immediate turn and start worrying about what God thinks. And, you know, when it comes to sharing Christ with others, I can never get out of my head this picture. And I think it was a friend of ours, Keith, that mentioned one time, talked about whenever you have somebody and you know they're not a believer, it's like they're walking in the middle of the road and there are cars coming by. Mm-hmm. And sooner or later, a car's going to come by and flatten them. Mm-hmm. And you don't know when that's going to be. It could be today, but it could be years from now. But at some point in time, they're going to get flattened by that car. And what would you do if you saw that? Well, you would go out there and you'd jerk them out of the road and you'd make sure they got out of the road, right? Mm-hmm. It would be an obvious thing. Well, when we have somebody, a friend of ours, who is not a believer, they're walking in the middle of the road and we're watching them walk in the middle of the road. And if we're not going out there and trying to pull them back, now they can push you away and go right back to the middle of the road. Mm-hmm. But if we're not trying to pull them back, oh my goodness, that's a terrible picture, right?
Well, I mean, Penn Jillette said, how bad do you have to hate me not to think that there is eternity with Christ and not tell me about it? How bad do you have to hate me?
Mm-hmm.
But society says, well, you're casting judgment. No, that's not casting judgment. It's trying to get my friend out of the middle of the road.
Yep.
Yeah. Great story, Dean.
As a Christian runner, you might find it hard to decide what to listen to while you run. If you're looking for positive and Christian music that will help you keep your pace, check out the Radioactive station on the new J Radio. We'll take care of picking the music so that you can concentrate on your run. Plus, you can count on us to make sure that the music is uplifting and encouraging. Check out jradio.com or download the app in your app store.
All right, every week I share a reason why running and or walking is so awesome. And this is why this week. Running can help you feel good about yourself. The studies show that when people begin running, there's a boost to their self-esteem. And of course, that's a good thing. We always feel better about ourselves when we accomplish things. And of course, whether you're running, you're walking, whatever you're doing, you're accomplishing something. You're making yourself healthier. And that tends to lead to people having more self-confidence and self-esteem. And that's a good thing. That one benefit alone would be enough to make running or walking worth it to some people. But so self-esteem, that's a good reason to be a runner.
Sure.
Okay, so last week we talked about these Addidas racing shoes. The one that cost $500. One thing I didn't realize about them is they're supposed to be like a one-use shoe. Like they're made to use one time and then throw them away. Like one marathon and then throw them away. $500. My goodness. I thought the entry fee to some of these races was too high. But that's interesting. I remember when Nike had a shoe and I had a pair of them that they were only supposed to be good for 100K. So the purposefully made they didn't have rubber on the bottom. They just had like the Vibram midsole. So they wore pretty quickly. And I loved those shoes. And I remember when I
bet you ran more than 100K in them.
I did. And when they were finally worn out, and I couldn't wear them anymore, it just broke my heart because they didn't make them anymore. And so I was like, man, I love those shoes.
Because nobody's going to buy a pair of shoes that only last 60 miles.
Yeah. Well, but the thing was, they were a lot like these. They were really light. They were like 4.5 ounces or something. They were really, really light. And so they felt really good. Felt like having socks on with a little cushioning under it. Anyway, this Adidas shoe, debuted in the Berlin Marathon. And we mentioned that last week. But I didn't realize that the woman who won the race and broke the world record by over 2 minutes was wearing a pair of those Adidas shoes. I only found that out after we did the podcast. So Tigist Assefa, she ran 2:11:53. Crazy fast time. But here's another thing I didn't realize at the time about Tigist Assefa. She was in the Olympics for the 800 meters not long ago. So think about that range. An 800-meter runner and a marathon.
An Olympic 800-meter run.
Yes. That's crazy, isn't it? But it even proves that the 800 meters was not her event, and yet she was good enough to go to the Olympics in it. It's pretty cool. And her time in this thing was so fast that there aren't many U.S. men that can run this fast. Like the professionals. There are professional U.S. marathoners who haven't run that fast or haven't run much faster than that, like within a minute.
Do you see that more? Because as soon as you said that, it made me think about, in the sport of triathlon, the people that are dominating now are the people who came up through the junior and the Olympic distances. And you've heard me say they learned how to get fast young, and then they just added distance on that. Do you see that? And I know you don't, but do you think there's anything to it?
I don't.
Because she obviously did. She obviously took her speed and added distance to it. Why don't you think you see that more? Because it seems like it makes sense in my head that would be a thing. Like it is in triathlon. You're seeing it more and more.
But tell me, name the triathlete who started by running longer races. None of them do. They all start shorter and get longer. All of them. So it would make sense that they start short and they run longer. I don't think that's true.
I don't think that's true from the elite level. A lot of the Ironmans of old, Craig Alexander and Chrissy Wellington and all those triathletes, they might have started with shorter, but a lot of them went straight into Ironman. They never got elite at the shorter distances. They went straight into the longer distances. I don't know. I feel like, to me, it's pretty obvious in the sport of triathlon that they got elite. Christian Blumenfeld and the Brownlees, Ben Canute here in the U.S., they were all incredibly fast young people. They came up through the ranks, the junior ranks, the Olympic ranks, and now they're just adding distance to something that they became very good at. And it's speed, and I know it's in the sport of triathlon, it's always kind of been speed or distance. And I know it's a little bit that way in running, but I wonder if we're going to start to see that more. Like if Ingebrigtsen, let's just take Ingebrigtsen.
He wants to run a marathon one day.
Does it not add up that he would be a great marathoner?
It does, but every marathoner out there ran track at one time. I mean, every elite marathoner ran on the track in shorter distances at one time. They all do it. That's what I'm saying. It's just a natural thing to do. When you're younger, those fast twitch muscle fibers work better, and so you use them. And as they don't work as well and they start to deteriorate, then it takes a long time. Tour de France, a good example. Okay, those guys don't train at shorter distances and then they do to some degree, but for the most part, but how many 21-year-olds are good at the Tour de France? Not many. It takes your body a long time to get to a point where you can do long endurance activities. That's what I think. And I think like the Tour de France, Tour de France is for guys in their late 20s. And
that's changing though. That's changing. It's starting to change, and I think, is it always been that was just the natural progression, that you do all you can at this distance, then you start to slow down, and then you do all you can at this distance, and you start to slow down, and then it's like the progression. It's like the progression where a lot of at least in the sport of triathlon, these Ironman athletes, they're not waiting till they slow down at the Olympic distance.
Neither are the track athletes.
They're jumping right in, right from the get-go.
I mean, the track athletes aren't waiting until they're washed up before they go to the marathon,
but you just never hear. You never hear about. You don't hear much, I should say, because I don't follow the sport of running as much. But, you don't hear as much about a young, great. This lady. She was great she was an Olympian in the 800 meter, and now she's transitioning into, you don't see that as much, do you?
Yeah. Eliud Kipchoge won an Olympic medal on the track before he started being the greatest marathoner ever. There's almost every major marathoner that you can name ran well at shorter distances before they ran at longer distances. It's just the natural progression of things. Why that is, I'm not exactly sure, but my gut feeling is that it just takes longer to be good at and at all over those years, you're building a really good base. I think it's more the base of running, and the number of miles overall that you're running that make you the good marathoner, not necessarily the fact you ran fast when you were younger. And I don't know. That's my feeling. I don't know. I don't know that we know. I don't know if there's ever been a study. I've never seen one.
Maybe we should do a study.
Maybe so. Maybe we should do a study. All right. Well, how about a trivia question for this week? This one's really simple, so we should get lots of answers for this one. Here's the question. It's the end of track season, or track and field for this year, but all those tracks are still out there for us to run on. How long is the average track, and how many lanes does it have? So I think most people know how long a track is. A lot of people do. But does everybody know how many lanes most tracks have? Not every track, but most tracks have. If you know the answer to that, you can send that to dean@runforgod.com and be the first one, and you'll win $20 off in the Run for God store. That question actually has changed over the years. Tracks actually, I think, had less lanes in them at one point.
They for sure did, yeah.
Yeah.
I've ran on some. It's neat. I've been some places for traveling with triathlon, especially you get like into the Midwest, the more rural areas, and you go to these tracks, and a lot of times they were out in the middle of a field.
Yeah.
And I remember one in Iowa we ran on. It's 2 lanes.
Yeah.
2-lane track.
Isn't that something?
In the middle of a field. It wasn't even around like a football field or anything. It was just out in the middle of the field.
Yeah.
And it was flat, no banks.
Yeah. That's funny. All right, I'll leave you with this motivational thought of the week. This is attributed to many people, so there's not a particular person who said this, but many have said something similar. The tallest oak in the forest was once just a little nut that held its ground. That's good. It's good stuff. We all have to start from somewhere, and wherever you are today, you may just be that little nut that's going to grow into a big oak. And I love to think about that from our faith standpoint, right? Our faith just being so small and then it just growing into this great big thing that God's using us for. All right. That is 185 episodes of the Run for God Run Club podcast.
200 to be here before we know it.
My goodness.
Will that be in January?
Right around the corner. 50. Yeah, it should be somewhere around there. Yeah. January or February. So looking forward to it. Yeah, we may do something cool and special. Who knows? We'll have to see.
At the beginning of the podcast, Dean threw out a challenge.
That's right.
100,000 downloads by the end of the year. We're all going to have to go to work and start sharing.
Yep.
Rating, sending it to your friends. But I think we can get there.
Yeah,
that'd be exciting.
We can too. Yeah. So do what you can to help us out, and let's get there and make this a big deal. All right. Until next week, may God bless every step of every run and or walk. Go out there and shine your light.
Good job, Dean.
For more information about the Run for God ministry, go to runforgod.com. If you have questions about your salvation, click on the Peace with God tab. There's nothing more important. Thanks for joining us today.